our John Dee study group. It's called Alchemy of Feynman-Enochian. Yeah, actually, Valerie, this is Vincent's book about Kelly, actually, right here. And and our friend edited this book. But yes, the obsidian scrying mirror supposedly came from the Aztecs, and some of our sources suggested that came with some astral hygiene challenges, because the Aztecs' use of a scrying mirror for ancestor memory communication had baggage, and that Kelly, the conversations between those who think that Dee and Kelly did not understand the astral hygiene issues, and that goes deeper if we think the obsidian mirror, black mirror, was related to the black goo infestation of the Kaaba stone, of which they spoke often as their source of the projective powder for the alchemy they did. So it's a pretty messy story.
Well, just wanted to let you guys know we are officially live at this moment. We have roughly 20-30 people in the stream. It'll probably go up to like way more than that, but yes, we are live. So Riel, of course, the floor is yours. However you'd like to kick this off, and yes, by all means.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Today is February 27th, 2022. Today we are privileged with having two guests of the show of Generation Z. We have Mr. Dan Winter and Mr. Ani Osaru, as well as we, of course, have Dave Z at Generation Z. Today's topic roundtable live stream discussion is called an advanced session fusing electrical engineering, deep occult esotericism, and suppressed UFO operations. So what I was thinking was I would give each of you a bit of an introduction, and then you can have your opportunities to kind of give your spiel. Don't really have much of an agenda with specific questions, but I think it'll be a pretty good free-flowing conversation between the four of us. I personally, as an independent researcher, I'm behind the scenes with Generation Z. I've been listening to many, many lectures of Ani and Dan, been listening to a lot of Generation Z's content as well. It's been amazing to accumulate the information from all these different angles, from the occult to the scientific electrical engineering to the obvious suppressed UFO operations. So what we can do is get started with giving Dan Winter an intro here. So Dan Winter is an established and extremely credentialed electrical engineer. He has been generous enough to be giving lectures to us at Generation Z, explaining his life's work of the physics of consciousness, plasma intelligence, the science of auras, and galactic history of ET intervention on Earth. You can find all of his content at fractalfield.com, as well as he has where he has his extensive anthology of his life's work, as well as the commercialized healing technology at therify.net. I believe book that, Dan, you have written, Fractal Space-Time, Origin of Negentropy, which is a project from the Implosion Group. You can find all of his work at fractalfield.com, also at goldenmean.info, therify.net, explosiongroup.com, fractalu.com, and of course his YouTube is Dan Winter at Fractal Field. So if you'd like to give us a little bit about your life's work and introduction to our audience.
Well, thank you. I really like you guys. You have the young energy that keeps me young, I hope. And we've been having a lot of fun here. Well, it's true. So in graduate school, I was doing psychophysiology, which was essentially the electrical engineering measurements of emotion. And that started me on a lifetime course. After that, I was, in the Gurdjieff school doing sacred gymnastic and having my first bliss experience, and then Kundalini. And I came to know the biomechanical engineer Ben Bentoff, who really wrote the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini. And I was, traveled the world for 30 years teaching physics of consciousness. And then we sort of embarked on technologies. Our therify.net plasma tech is used for healing and rejuvenation in 25 countries. And flameinmind.com, our brainwave biofeedback for bliss. And the harmonics that they're from the binaural beat is one of the world's most powerful bliss binaural triggers. And that leads directly to the fractal physics of, as you said, negentropy, implosion, creating self-organization. And that then, I think, leads us to what maybe we're here for tonight, which is talking about how we can see some of the physics of esoteric histories. For example, we were just chatting with Ani about John Dee's use of the scrying stone, the obsidian mirror, the black mirror, and how the Olmec communicated with their ancestors, which we believe we understand some of that physics, longitudinal interferometry, that kind of stuff. And then that work is also, we were just discussing Vincent Bridges, our partner who wrote the book on Kelly and John Dee, which is the physics, and I do mean the electrical engineering physics of alchemy, non-destructive charge collapse, isotope transitions, that kind of stuff. And we have actually science teams, we have groups, implosiongroup.com, that are deeply involved in that physics. In fact, we have a group involved in the LENR fusion physics from Rossi, actually, our partner Roger Green, breakthroughtechnologies.com. And we are active in many of those technology groups. I'm very fortunate. We, after a lifetime of teaching breakthrough physics and that kind of stuff, we actually do the technology with some of these groups. So we're having a certain amount of fun, and it's very appropriate to share because this is about education. So I'm happy to do this brainstorm and ready for anything. Let's go. All good.
Wow, thank you so much, Dan. Amazing. So next up, we have Ani Osaru. He is what I'm going to call a master in the deep occult esoteric topics. He has also been generous enough to collaborate with Generation Z on our Patreon and on the public sector with giving us lectures of his knowledge. He is helping us understand the forces behind the global octopus of control in ways that most people would never have imagined through the three trees of Kabbalah, Gematria, and exposing the predatory cryptocracy. Ani can be found at Ani Osaru on YouTube, where he does extensive deep dives, usually multiple hours each session. He is also author of The Blueprint of Darkness, a premise on the eradication of mind tricks in a mind-controlled society. Ani, feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work.
Yes, hey, how is everyone? It's a pleasure to be on this platform today. And I've been looking forward to this. It's actually Rio's birthday today, and my birthday will be tomorrow. So this is
really?
A treat. Yeah,
cool.
A Piscean treat and collaboration. So shout out to my brother over there. But yeah, I've been into occult esotericism for about 10 years. I started with watching lectures with Bobby Hemmett and other metaphysicians into the knowledge, and it kind of expanded my thought on spirituality. I've been looking into the UFO phenomenon, or UAP phenomenon. They change these names so often these days. And then I expanded into Kabbalah, and now I'm even expanding to Gematria and what is the physics of darkness. So that's what I'll be getting into today, because they very much hide what the physics of darkness is very, very big to the complex of everything in esotericism and metaphysics in our daily lives. We all close our eyes and we have to go to the darkness every day, dream and meditation or whatever it is. So that's what I'm into right now. And I have a big following on Patreon and YouTube, and shout out to everyone who's out there that's watching from there. And it's a pleasure to be on here today to have this discussion with you guys.
Thank you so much, Ani. Yes, and this is a dream come true for me to celebrate my birthday this way. This is, beyond belief to have this opportunity to share this with all three of you. So thank you so much. And finally, we have Dave Zed, our host and founder of the podcast Generation Z podcast. This is going to be, Dave is well-versed in the live streaming world. Dave is the reason we're here today, being able to fuse such diverse areas of reality. His angle, as you all know, is investigating the suppressed UFO and deep state intelligence, guiding us through the UFO disclosure PSYOP. You can find Dave and the Generation Z community at Generation Z Podcast on YouTube and on Patreon.
I'm humbled by the introduction. Thank you so very much. But it's an honor and it's a pleasure to be here on this panel with you guys. So I mean, again, I don't want to spend too much time introducing myself, because anyone coming to the live stream right now obviously knows the channel and all that. But I think I'm very, very humbled and excited. So thank you so much. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Amazing. Well, for me, I actually would love to start with you, Dave, because you're the one that's been listening to, having the discussions with Ani and Dan. So how has the influence of the esoteric side and the physics side of things affected your research into understanding the UFO phenomena, the intelligence angle side of things, the suppressed information?
Oh, wow. Well, first off, thank you for the question. First and foremost, Ani's done a fantastic job of sort of laying out, in my personal opinion, the history of things overall, because I've always said on the channel too, I don't like to necessarily delve into too much deep, far back history, because who am I to say what happened and what didn't happen? That's sort of my perspective. It's more about piecing bringing the pieces together, and I think Ani does a fantastic job of that. And then Mr. Winter, of course, does a great job of implementing the not just the electrical engineering aspect, but the science to it, really, that the more I delve into it, the more I realize that Mr. Winter's work just leads back in ironically or unironically, a sort of donut toroid field way to Ani's type work, and it just keeps cycling over and over again with respects to how things keep fitting. So I mean, I'm just extremely grateful. I have loads and loads of questions, but I don't truthfully, I don't know where to start, to tell you the truth. But
Well, hey, if you got him, shoot away, Dave.
well, sure. Actually, I wanted to start with Mr. Winter, if possible. So, what I've been noticing lately is that it seems as though, and I'd like to thank the Patreon community for helping me understand this, because this didn't just come from me, but geometry, what's been called sacred geometry, seems to be something that is very loosely described and defined when trying to convert into, I guess you could say, mathematical or scientific equations. And I wanted to ask Mr. Winter, do you think, in your opinion, that's because if revealing those type of equations would prevent, say, a unified field theory, or would present something like this coming forward, which, I guess a lot of people in the control structure don't want to happen?
Well, I think it's actually embarrassingly simple. I've always said that the concept of sacred geometry simply refers to what wave interference geometry emerges as sustainable. So if you take, for example, my new equation, you take Planck, the musical key signature of the universe, and keep multiplying by golden ratio, and you get geometry of hydrogen, Earth, DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and photosynthesis, and all the important wavelengths. So that is showing that the golden ratio, literally the essence of sacred geometry, is the wave mechanics of successful constructive compression, and therefore the origin of sustainability, because successful constructive wave interference is how anything sustains. And if it doesn't emerge from constructive wave interference, it doesn't emerge, period, because the universe is waves. So sacred geometry is simply a name for constructive wave interference, very simple. It's an introduction to the essence of sustainability in quantum mechanics, for example, where implosion would define the negentropy called peacemaking, whether it's in brainwaves, in geobiology, or in magnetic maps. So sacred geometry is an introduction to pure physics, and what the beauty of sustainability in pure physics and the definition of peacemaking. And whether there's some insidious plot to prevent that from being revealed, I've always taken the view, and maybe I want to talk later about the darkness problem with Ani, but I've always taken the view that, maybe I choose to take this view optimistically, that it isn't so much that so many people are evil, it's really just that they're dumb. I choose to believe it's massive stupidity. That's just my prejudice. And by that, I mean, for example, you take the majority, actually every single physicist on this planet who doesn't have the first clue of why an object falls to the ground. And if you say to one of them, hello, fractality causes the implosive compression called gravity. Oh, it's a simple answer. It's a one-sentence answer, and it happens to be powerfully accurate physics. Well, of course, they might have to be a little bit embarrassed that they've been ignoring the elephant in the room for their entire, not just their lifetimes. So hello, I think it's just a matter of resistance to being shown that they've been idiots. That's an example. The cause of consciousness, the same thing, charge implosion. The cause of negentropy, charge implosion. The cause of alchemy, charge implosion.
Right.
So it's so simple, it's embarrassing. That's my answer to your question.
Got you. So just not to hog the spotlight here, but just to add to that, that's a very interesting point, that there's not necessarily a group of individuals constantly plotting to screw the masses over. I really like that perspective, because I'm not sure if I asked you this on our previous lecture on Patreon, but I think I showed you an article having to do with Mr. James Clerk Maxwell and how his work was, by Oliver Heaviside, William Gifford, and Heinrich Hertz, was interpreted or edited. Would that be something that you would subscribe to all the way back in the day of, late 1800s, early 1900s, deliberately messing up his unified field theory? Because I only ask this because that seems to give substance to what Hal Puthoff recently said to Eric Weinstein, which was that he implied string theory was deliberately meant to throw off the scientific community for a prolonged amount of time.
Well, very appropriate question. Actually, I am a student of Tom Bearden, clearly, who wrote the equations to prove that longitudinal interferometry is gravity waves, all at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. And Tom Bearden spent half his life agreeing with you, specifically saying that the day that Oliver Heaviside castrated Maxwell's equations, removing the quaternion, which is the representation of the rotational component.
Right.
So ever since Heaviside castrated Maxwell's equations, you couldn't even represent spin.
Right.
Hello? So which is torsional, otherwise known as scalar, or longitudinal. So absolutely, Tom Bearden agrees with you completely. There's been a nasty conspiracy started by Heaviside to castrate Maxwell's equations and make it impossible to represent spin, and therefore impossible to understand phase conjugation specifically. And this is Tom Bearden. It's all over his book, and that's at the bottom of fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. Essentially, what that says is that without the quaternion, the fourth element of Maxwell's equations, you have the XYZ component, the vectors, but you don't have the fourth element, which is the spin rotation, even represented it. So when Einstein was trying to represent a unified field, he didn't have the quaternion, the fourth element of the equation, even represent spin. So of course he couldn't see what implosion was because it's a vortex.
Do you subscribe to Mr. Heaviside suppressing the work there?
Well, I'm an electrical engineer and actually not a mathematician, but I would say that Heaviside is well known for having accomplished many things mathematically by at least making fields representable, so people at least could get a handle on some equations. So I'm not saying Heaviside was evil in this sense. I'm just saying that the work he did by oversimplifying, by removing the quaternion, literally the fourth element, meant that all mathematical representations of Maxwell's equation from the day of Heaviside were castrated in the sense they couldn't see and represent and quantize spin, and therefore could not understand how rotation in a vortex caused gravity.
It makes me think if there was some political pressure behind the scenes that Mr. Heaviside was, pressed to do. Right.
Yeah, Bearden believed that, and also my other partner, Bill Elizabeth Donovan, is deep into that story exactly. Yes.
Wow.
There are many stories like that, but I wouldn't claim to represent that myself because I don't claim to be an expert on that question. All I know is that if you can't represent vorticity accurately, you will not see how a phase conjugate charge implosion goes down the exact 60-degree light cone to make the fractal phase conjugate charge implosion, which accelerates charge towards center, and that's named the gravity. And you will not represent that in an equation without the quaternion fourth spin element.
Got you. Thank you.
Which Einstein didn't even have.
Wow, so he was going off of... Yeah, okay. Got you. Thank you.
Castrated equations.
That's the first time I'm hearing that, so that's amazing. And so, yeah, for the format today, like anybody, feel free, you can raise your hand if you want to say something, or just, we're going to have a respectful civil discussion. So just, be courteous about interjecting and all that. But so that's interesting. And Dan, that's a classic double Scorpio response. I think blaming stupidity.
We don't apologize for staying. We enjoy it.
That is. I hope my sister's watching. And when I told her that you're a double Scorpio, she's also a Scorpio, and said, "I bet Dan has never apologized in his life."
Valerie's a Scorpio too. So we do quite well.
Whereas I'm, I kind of like, I apologize first to defuse the situation. That's my method of de-escalation with conflict. But so I wanted to actually ask Ani that. So I think that, Ani, you might have the opposite perspective, that there might be some deliberate suppression of information instead of just stupidity. Do you have any thoughts on that realm?
Absolutely. My studies have led not specifically into the science part of it, even though I have some science for you guys today, but specifically I follow Gnosticism in the Nag Hammadi library that was dug up, I believe, in the early 1950s. And they subscribe to some information on a entity called the demiurge or demiurgos, where they're manipulating, they got into the DNA of humankind, and they began to plan some type of suppression of soul information. That's why when we get into the religious context, a lot of churches I came into, in my experience, I don't know about you guys, I never really got a direct answer about what the soul is. I just never got a direct answer. I hear the sun, I hear all types of stuff, but I just asked my pastor, what is the soul? Did the Bible have something specifically about the soul? Did God create the soul and all of this type stuff? And that goes into everything else, into society, whereas I believe esoteric information of unlocking what Dan Winters talk about, astral hygiene. The science into that isn't something that's presented to us on a regular basis, especially in the deducation. I don't call it the education. It's actually the deducation apparatus that we go through from K to college, or if you get your master's or whatnot. So it's just very much, I believe, is being suppressed. I know it's a lot of secret societies. I won't put, their names out on this specific platform, but in the gematria, which is using numerology to have synchronistic nodes of spiritual communication between the stars. They have something, they're studying some type of plasma in the atmosphere, whereas they can determine the time astrologically when a specific spirit enters into certain ley lines in different fields. And these spirits begin to affect and have a effect on our consciousness on how we communicate. That's why during full moons you have a lot more rapid crying and crazy stuff. They call it lunacy. Lunar lunacy happens around the full moon. So this is also comparative to sidereal astrology, whereas fixed stars pass through the moon. And then you have the ecliptic of the sun's path. The sun's path is affecting our consciousness. The moon's path is affecting our subconscious. And these people, they study both paths. They study the solar path, they study the moon path, and they know when to put a psyop at a specific time. Like everybody's talking about the Pluto return right now. But if you study sidereal astrology, you will see that the Pluto return actually happened at the beginning of 2020 when the pandemic actually started or whatnot. That was actually the sidereal version of the Pluto return, when they had a reverse of that. And now you just see in the news and all of the media outlets, it seems real strange with information right now. So it's just very strange. In my life coming up, I've never seen more strangeness with information, even this war that's beginning right now. It's just very, very strange, and a lot of contradictions to what I hear.
If I may, maybe I could suggest a few thoughts about what Ani brought up very usefully. First, as we've discussed in our series, the physics of what is a soul is becoming more and more clear, that when the charge field of the aura, which is cold plasma, becomes compressed, for example, in bliss or kundalini, that the radiance that emerges from that center is converted from the transverse to the longitudinal electromagnetic wave component, which is a compression wave, which we know goes faster than light and is the physics of action at distance, absolutely. And we know, we can prove that, for example, you create longitudinal coherence, Therify.net plasma, you trigger lucid dreaming, which is that propagation of that longitudinal coherence, literally the physics of soul, meaning we know exactly what allows you to take memory through death, literally the physics of soul, which is to propagate in that longitudinal array, which even Tom Bearden talked about, which Aboriginals call dreaming tracks, song lines. And in that array, we know that's the physics of where you can measure telepathy commercially, as Cozy Red proved. So we have a lot on the physics of soul now, once we understand a little bit about longitudinal compression and how that, we call it the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan body, the rainbow light body. But we think we know what it is electrically, even as Karatkov followed the plasma of those who had just died to see where the soul goes and why, and photographed. And we know why. The plasma of the recently deceased has to go to the center of local compression to gain the centripetal acceleration necessary to propagate into that array called the collective unconscious, which is why exactly the things like Theraphite had met is replicably so well known for releasing dead ghosts. So anyway, we have some intuitions of what we mean by soul now, and that would then lead us later when we talk about what it means to go into that darkness. That to enter that array sustainably requires a quality of attention, as Gurdjieff would say, which some people call it non-solubility of pure intent, literally a shareable wave. But you know, it's like the collective ancestral memory won't let you in unless, obviously, pure intention. But what does pure intention mean electrically? It means the wave that survives compression. Exactly why anger, 1/7 electrically, cannot survive death, because it's a compression geometry that will create destructive interference. So if you have anger at death, you're in big trouble, actually. That's why you can't lucid dream, that sort of thing. And the next thing I was going to say about the lunar concept, we actually know why people go nuts at the full moon. It's pretty simple. The moon is a hollow metal artificial. It was originally from the Andromedans. So when that, for example, comes between the sun and the earth, it is opposite to phase conjugate. And you can measurably prove inhibits seed germination. And we know exactly why. Because the longitudinal coherence from the sun cannot go through the hollow metal opposite to conjugate moon. So the presence of the moon is death to seed germination. And we know exactly why. So the reason that people go nuts on the full moon is the access to the longitudinal coherence of the sun is not available. For example, when you put that copper plate on your roof and a wire down to the basement, the plants grow perfectly in pitch blackness because they get the longitudinal coherence of the sun, except on the day of the full moon or on the day of the lunar eclipse. Because that longitudinal, the lunar issue is actually quite understandable. You know, they say the Andromedans offered to tow it out of here because it's full of parasites, but really recently they kicked out a bunch of the parasites, and it was required for Earth's orbit after they blew up Marduk. So that's another long story. And the other thing is about the demiurge that you brought up. If we track who Enlil Yahweh was, who Anne Rice correctly said is the Grim Reaper, and the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, most likely, and a cloning mistake originally, as Enki Anton Park proved, that the demiurge, remember that Urge, the UR in Urge means ancient Draco blood, UR. So the demiurge is the geometry of astral parasites. That's what it is in general. And you're right, though. The presence of those astral parasites in the Earth grid does depend on really astrologic geometry. Let me quite the term. It's the physics of right angle phase conjugation, which determines when you cannot embed in that array. Prime example, you must have sunrise and sunset to successfully do Agnihotra, which is fabulously fertilizing the land and eliminates plasma parasites. And that is 4 right angles called 4-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics and sacred 4 directions in Aboriginal lore. And so that's an introduction to what a 90-degree angle means in astrology. It means a stressful relationship. Well, actually, it means a phase conjugate relationship. So I think this propagation of the grid, and I was going to go in more into this, how you inhabit the dark, but let's do more later. So that was just a few comments.
That's
wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, Ani, anything. Dave, any questions? That's I just want to throw that out there that of all the things that we're talking about today, the moon is one of my absolute favorite things. And I think that as paradigm shattering as these perspectives might be to the average person, when we say that the moon is hollow, I think that might like turn off a lot of people, just because it's like, well, like, you know.
Oh, well, when the NASA landed the rover back down and measured the seismic, they thought it might vibrate for 3 seconds. It rang like a bell for like 3 days.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That is absolutely
in the literature.
True. And I don't really know how they explained it at the time,
well,
but then that led into
clue.
Yeah.
No, what happened? when in the Wars of Expansion, when the Federation came here to kick out the Draco, and they blew up Marduk, and that caused the Great Flood, and the orbital geometries became unstable. So they used an old, pretty much dead artificial planetoid, which the Andromedans are famous for, and towed it in here to stabilize the orbit. And we need it to stabilize the orbit. There's no question. But then it became infested with Greys and Dracos until recently. The Galactic Federation kicked out the Greys and Dracos. Now there's hope.
Ani, brother, do you want to jump in?
Oh, I'll just quick comment. He's absolutely right. There's a lot of occult themes in shows, and what he was saying about the Uru and this sacred geometry of astral parasites. There's actually it's not called a tarot deck. It's called a tarocchi deck from the Italian Renaissance, called the Solabusca deck, which showcases how the elites have been doing rituals for a period of time to try to attach themselves to those specific Draco bloodlines or parasitic bloodlines that have I will say they're the managers of the planet. They kind of like manage everything. They're put as the control. I won't say they don't have control over everything, but they're put as the facade of the control in front of us. And so they studied the Solabusca deck, which is called the Game of Saturn, and how to join up after death into these particular parasitic bloodlines, and how to come back and be born back incarnated into those bloodlines and have it receptively go. They've been studying that type of science in that Solabusca deck of the Italian Renaissance. And also there's another show called The Dark Crystal that Jim Henson came. I think he's the one who did the Muppets as well, but he's an occultist, and he did the Dark Crystal. And at the end, the Skeksis joined with the Geflings. Queen Elizabeth's last name, apparently, that's on record, is Geflin. And when they conjoined, they made something called the Oru. It's like the UR, like in Dan's research. It's something called the Oru, and they combine, and it makes a crystal palace at the end of it. So some type of alchemical merger that happens right there. I don't know if they're discussing pre-plasmoid history on the planet. I don't know if it's esoteric, but that's interesting what he just said, and I agree wholeheartedly that Yahweh, these beings before and now, some of them are astral parasites.
Yeah, and when Lawrence Gardner in Genesis of the Grail King, he documented that the Draco basically invented royal bloodlines to be babysitters for their genetic experiment, and massaged the royal families of Europe, Elizabeth, the Russians, and etc., for thousands of years, just like we do show dogs, for a very specific purpose, to make babysitters for their genetic experiment. And that's Lawrence Gardner was one of the best historians out there. He was right about that. But now, if we believe Elena Dedan, and I do, the Federation has kicked many of the Draco out of the solar system, and the Greys, the Kumar, maybe they're called. But as Will Johann Fritz said in our interviews, had two of them on my channel, who was the only guy on the planet who's personally stood up to the White Queen of the Draco. I mean, that guy's been there. And he says, well, yeah, I mean, you might have got the Draco out of here, but it's like pulling a tick out of your blood. You still got messes, and which is the residue of the possessive empire. And their idea of possession was what Enki, Osiris, was doing. His other name was Nudimmud the Cloner. And he was a genetic engineer, and that's what they do. And Elena Denan confirmed that. They came from. But the good news is, you see, on the high side of Enki's family, Osiris, his mother was sneaking very high-end DNA into the genetic experiment. If we didn't have kick butt Draco blood here. I wouldn't have had Kundalini, you know. So we needed some of that fierce DNA in our genetic mix here, and our DNA is some of the most interesting in the galaxy. That's why they're all lining up to play with our genetics. Our technology is crap, but our DNA is highly interesting. And so the point being then that high side of Enki's family, called Kadistu or Kiristu, used what's called the Girku by Anton Parks, called fire crystal toy stone, literally a dark crystal, Enki's iPhone, as it were. And that crystal was not just their recording device and their weapon. It was beam me up, Scotty. It was the phase conjugate dielectric of the dilithium crystals of Stargate. It's the dark crystal. That's true. And on the high side, that plasma intelligence, which was on the high side of Enki's family, called Kadistu Kiristu, from which we get the word Caduceus, it returns. I think Elena Denon is right. And 500 starships just showed up outside of Ganymede to say, we've just saved the human race and we're here too. And this intelligence is called the Nine, by the way. We just did a documentary with Elena on that. And the Nine is talked about by the Hopi and the Japanese and the Ennead, from anyone from Egypt to the Greeks. They all had their Ennead. And the Nine was how the Anunnaki counted up their family power. Literally, the body politic was named the Nine. And that is plasma physics. That's in plasma intelligence. 9 plasma toroids nested. goldenmean.info/whale dreamers. So that is a high end for that genetic experiment. But to just try to finish the thought about the dark crystal, on the other side of that story was the fact that super high dielectrics are used as DNA radio by the good guys and the bad guys. That's the downside of the story. So that dark crystal, the Kaaba stone of the Muslim, it was a gold vapor impregnated foam inside a glass meteorite with a super dielectric constant. And at the time of the Mad Caliph, 60% of the volume is documented missing. They ate it, and that's how he went mad, as all alchemists do. They eat their philosopher's stone. And my partner Vincent, who remembered Kelly, that's where they got their red powder that they made the gold. And we know the physics. It was implosive charge collapse catalyzed by a super dielectric powder, the red powder. And that's the physics of alchemy. And it was a dark crystal. And by the way, what else was in that Kaaba stone is this black goo, carbon nano, which the most parasitic AI in the galaxy uses viciously to eat gene pools, literally. And that black goo is bad news. And that's what Johann Fritz specifically accused John Dee of not knowing was in his dark obsidian crystal he got from the Aztecs, who used it for ancestor phone calls. And that's why people like Michael Sarian said John Dee called in the bad guys. And yet our team says John Dee called in the good guys. Well, astral hygiene 101 here. Dark crystal.
Did you want to jump in, Ani, or?
Oh, no, that was excellent. That was excellent. I'm just sitting back listening. If y'all want to
sure.
transition.
I wanted to ask Dan, actually, wanted to pick your brain since we're on this topic. So there's all this discussion all around the world at this point. There's more and more people seeming to wake up to, the ET affairs and things like this and what's going on. And a lot of people just simply question whether it's on a small scale or on a much larger scale. What's the outcome with all of this? And the reason I wanted to ask you about this is because I recently listened to I believe a physicist called Nicholas Gisin. Not sure if you've ever heard of this gentleman. And his proposal essentially is that free will or destiny or fate, if you will, is indeterminate. So his example is that, say, I say, okay, guys, tomorrow I'm going to make a prediction. It's either going to be rain or it's not. Right? So that's basically black or white, yes or no. Mr. Gisin's proposal is that there's a third option, which is that this third option or third variable is indeterminate. So with respects to, all this, what's going on in Ukraine, with respects to the ET affairs and all that, a lot of people seem to wonder, what's going to, will there be a positive, kumbaya, we all sit by the fire after all this part of my English shit show is over? Do you subscribe to that type of science with there being an indeterminate variable with respects to free will or fate?
Well, remember why the Galactic Federation has such strict rules about not interfering with indigenous gene pools like Earth. It's because if you don't set them free, they'll never grow up. And that refers to your teenagers as well. What that means is they can never take responsibility for their own decisions. Now, another way is to look at this chemically. The degrees of freedom in a chemical reaction determine the possible evolution of complexity. So the more you set the variables free, temperature, pressure, voltage, the more degrees of freedom in chemical reaction, the more possibility you could learn something new. But that could be messy. So, they knew they needed to set gene pools free, but they drew a line under it when the parasitic infestation with the Greys infested with Eisenhower and the Dracos took over. So the Federation drew a line under that, and they did a massive effort to kick out the bad guys here. But still, the Federations, they step back now and say, hey, we got the ET bad guys here, but the humans, and there's obviously good and bad, they got to sort the rest of that out themselves or they're never going to grow up. Hello? And so it does mean we need to sort out the intentions. Absolutely. And
in your opinion, sir, is the science there for these archons or demiurges to not limit us to having a negative outcome in the long term? That's sort of where my question was getting at. Is this indeterminate variable, as proposed by some of these physicists, is it possible that even under this alleged archonic demiurge control, there's still a positive outcome in the big picture of it all?
I believe what they called Archon is literally the high winged Draco called Siakar. Actually, I think that's the root of the term Archon, and winged Draco, as it were. And they did have definite intentions in the solar system, and they're still vicious, and there's still many sectors of the galaxy that are very dangerous because of them. But the solar system right now has a huge amount of protection against that level of interference newly. And that gives us hope. It means we could, if you believe the narrative, I happen to believe, because I know the people involved in this narrative, Michael Salla, Elena Danaan, Alex Collier, who I've known for 25 years of the Andromedans. So, and everyone's agreeing on this story now. The secret space program survivors, Johann Fritz, everyone agrees on the story. There's no disagreement. There's consensus. Right. And what that consensus implied is, yes, they got the worst of the ETs out of here, but now we've got to make our own decisions. But we have a good shot at that.
Now, and what do you say, sir, to the military-industrial complex? Do you think that whole presence of the Draco there has been removed? It's now just the remnants of a tick, so to speak?
Well, half the countries on the planet are driven by their weapons industry, obviously, as they're driven by their big pharma that doesn't know what a soul is. So yeah, we got some, serious I see this as a problem of education.
Right.
I take the positive view.
Right. And okay, this is interesting because a lot of people say, for example, with respects to the June report from last year within America on UFOs, the report basically said there's something there, but there's also nothing, but it was a very word salad-y type thing, and a lot of people gathered that there was infighting within the Department of State in the U.S. Right, some factions wanting some of this to come out, other factions saying over my dead body, and the over my dead body faction seems to be really waning in its control and power, which makes me think that was the Department of Energy, Atomic Energy Commission, Edward Teller whole group there that had that alleged Draco infestation that's now they're dying off of old age in this realm, or as you've said, right, they've been pushed out, so to speak. So, but what do you say to people saying, oh, they've been duped so many times that they think any positivity is just a Project Bluebeam fake alien invasion to justify space militarization?
I think it's actually dumber than that. It's so simple it's embarrassing. Again,
wow.
Well, the half of that report was about what they call the tic tac. Yeah. Now, you know what the tic tac is the same thing they called the Foo Fighters in World War II, which is longitudinal plasma interferometry. That's literally why it is. That's why they can make a right turn at 10,000 miles an hour, because it's a plasma cocoon being directed remotely by longitudinal interferometry. The longitudinal radar technicians from Germany went to Russia. They got the good ones. The Americans got the rocket scientists from Germany, but that wasn't even important.
So the Russians got the better ones.
The Russians got the scalar physics, absolutely, longitudinal interferometry. So they understood immediately how these plasmoids are being steered around,
Okay.
And that's, this is again Tom Bearden. But so then you look at, oh, well, actually, is ET a craft or is it a plasma being? Is it a plasma intelligence? Well, what they say is, if they arrived in heavy metal, they're from the wrong side of the tracks. If they arrived in a plasma cocoon made of genetic material, then you should talk to them.
Whoa, thank you for that very much. Thank you. Riel, please.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I'm laughing a lot during this, so I'm keeping myself on mute, but I feel so animated from this information. That makes a lot of sense, that the Russians actually got the kind of the torsion field physics, because that's Nikolai Kozyrev, right? Torsion field physics. So that's where the Russians made the advances.
The Russians.
That's right. They had, and that's why the scalar weapon could take out that U.S. Navy ship in the Black Sea, and all the Navy sailors quit after that when they saw that all one craft flying overhead. That's a plasma interferometric beam. It's a longitudinal wave node. That's what it is, and that is called plasma containment. And it makes all our efforts at fusion research stupid, because the problem is plasma containment. And if you know how to do microwave longitudinal phase conjugate interferometry, that's a problem of a 3-year-old could solve.
Yes, I have.
I don't mind. I think we should break up some of that and take that.
Absolutely.
Here.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
When you say when time reverses, that is exactly what happens when you phase conjugate to the Planck threshold, which is exactly where you enter the darkness. And that's called the time reversal in conventional physics. And the understanding of how that works, precisely the reason gravity exists, Einstein described the problem perfectly. He said, what he did not understand was non-destructive charge collapse. And that's why he never figured out why an object falls to the ground. And what happens when you phase conjugate to the Planck threshold by fractality perfected is precisely you solve the problem of non-destructive charge compression. And when you got to that Planck threshold, you went into the darkness. The darkness is that array, specifically what you just referred to as where you propagate your consciousness into the dream. We've now proven by experiment what enables propagation into the lucid dream. It's coherent longitudinal interferometry, replicably triggered by Therify.net longitudinal coherent plasma. So we understand a lot about what that darkness is. And the idea that is a reverse transmutation, it's literally a phase conjugate mirror. That's what it is. It's a reverse mirror, obviously. And it is specifically the only name for what is an event horizon. That is the ultimate event horizon, is can you survive compression through Planck, which is precisely the electrical problem of compression called successful death. If you can get your memories imploded into that array, that's the darkness that you need to inhabit. Absolutely. That's Enki Osiris's. That's all. That's what the dark crystal was about. Anyway, so I just think that, again, I think the solution is so simple, it's embarrassing. Look, E equals MC squared means something truly simple, so simple it's embarrassing. When light goes in a circle, it stores inertia, and that's named mass. Hello, that's not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Light is just named for a slip knot traveling in that array of the infinite compressible media of charge called ether, which behaves exactly like a superfluid. And when you get a slip knot in that array, it's called a photon. That's old news. We know exactly. And the fact that the photons agreed on the speed of light and Planck, length, energy, and time, is what stabilized the array that's called the gravity grid, which is a longitudinal array. And by the way, this bit about light speed being variable, no. Raymond Chow did the most number of measurements faster than light on planet Earth. And guess what? Virtually everyone was between 1.5 to 1.7 times c light speed. Hint, 1.618 golden ratio times light speed is the most common measurement of faster than light ever made on this planet, which is absolute smoking gun proof of our theory of gravity. When waves go through the speed of light, they do so by golden ratio, by phase conjugating through Planck. And the fact that that's been measured by Professor Raymond Chow, and the fact that the radii of hydrogen is golden ratio proves that. It's all a smoking gun. That phase conjugation to Planck is the cause of gravity. And the only way in and out of the black hole to that darkness. So study the coherence of the physics of a longitudinal array, and you can inhabit the darkness. They always said, well, if your intention is pure, you'll take memory through death. Well, that's called inhabiting the darkness. and so penetrating that array, I don't think we need to talk about, deep and dark mysteries. I think we need to understand how a wave works.
Very interesting.
Absolutely. You were saying something?
Yeah, well, that's super interesting. I wanted some clarification on when you're saying it's the quadrature of the circle. Is that like the Vitruvian Man, the squared circle? Is that just like a fancier way of saying that?
Pretty much. It's just talking about, I think, the square radian of the circulation, which is
quadrants of a circle. 90-degree quadrants. And 90-degree angles is the beginning and end of phase conjugation. That's how you make lasers phase conjugate.
Right on. And you also, so you touched on, it's really interesting to see the parallels between, were you reading your own notes, or that's from the book of Necro Yoga?
This is my notes combined with another paper on the physics of darkness. So I took some of the notes and I combined it with my research with W.H. Mueller. But Necro Yoga is talking about something a little bit different.
In physics, antimatter is just the same wave of charge that's 180 degrees out of phase. That's why it implodes with matter. So it's very simple. And in physics, the concept of dark matter is stupid and only believed by idiots. The dark matter was only invented by physicists who said there's too much damn gravity around here. We don't know where it came from. You know why they don't know where it came from? Because they don't know the cause of gravity. Obviously, they don't know why there's more gravity around, except the universe is arranged in a golden ratio fractal dodecacenter of masses. So now we know where the extra gravity came from, and this idea of dark matter was just plain stupid.
When you say dark matter, Mr. Winter, you're referring to the way in which it's been referenced, and even just the term itself, dark matter?
Dark matter is only defined in physics as the missing mass to account for more gravity than we expected. And the reason there's more gravity than we expected is simple. The mass is arranged in a fractal. The universe's masses are stellated like specifically a dodecahedron. That was on the cover of New Scientist magazine. So now we know where the extra gravity came from once we learned the cause of gravity is fractal. And therefore, this idea of dark matter was just a plain stupidity invented by people who don't know why objects fall to the ground.
Does this fit into your work, Ani, or does your work take a little bit of a different perspective or direction?
Completely different. I believe, I don't know if they were stupid or they were ignorant, because stupid would probably mean they didn't know, they knew what it was, and ignorant, they didn't know.
If you don't know why an object falls to the ground, you're going to look stupid, so you need to make up stupid things like, oh, there's extra mass out there somewhere because there's extra gravity. Well, there's extra gravity because the mass is arranged in a fractal. That's the cause of gravity.
Right.
To be fair, they also, though, we know that there's a lot of stupid narratives out there right now, as we've experienced over the past 2 years. And I don't really subscribe to the idea that it's stupid people behind these stupid ideas, but perhaps, intelligent people that know how to say stupid things to get the masses to believe stupid things.
Well, I believe the masses are stupid.
They needed a band-aid.
We're not calling our audience stupid, for the record.
No,
Everybody here is very smart, of course.
And actually, it's becoming fashionable in physics now to criticize the idea of dark matter. More and more people are seeing that that's the case. Once you understand the cause of gravity, you don't need such stupid ideas as there's mysterious mass hanging out there. We don't know where it is.
Well, I want to draw that parallel to, and Dave's familiar with this, it's a group called the Collins Elite that we've studied when we've looked into Eisenhower's group with the Greada Treaty, which was allegedly, as Dan Winters talked about, how Eisenhower had an agreement with extraterrestrials, and he kind of got swindled by some parasitic beings, etc. The Greys, yeah. So there's a group of MJ-12, allegedly a sub branch of MJ-12, who's this alleged intelligence group that was tasked with, basically, maybe Dave, you can give a better explanation of who MJ-12 are and Collins Elite, but I want to go in the direction of how they were influenced by their religious beliefs when they were trying to understand what the extraterrestrial phenomena was, how they interpreted UFOs as the work of Satan, and that it was just Satan pretending to be aliens, because I believe that Collins Elite is kind of a way to describe this like Christian fundamentalist view of the individuals in the intelligence agency that were regular people that were trying to figure out what was going on, but were, they subscribed to what was in the Bible. So
Right.
instead of like, I don't think that they were stupid necessarily, but they were potentially strongly influenced by their religious background, which gave them the influence of interpreting things as they were.
Which, if I'm
Like,
being honest with you, I'm very shocked that, again, just in general, such intelligent people, and I say this in life in general, are able to, and maybe I'm not one to talk, but how they're able to have such open-minded perspectives on certain things, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes to, ETs in their craft, and then you have, the alleged faction of within the Air Force that inhabits the largest group of the Collins Elite, that no matter what, they're demonic, don't care. I'm wiping my hands clean of this. Like, everything and anything that comes from it is the devil himself.
I think, again, I think this problem is simpler. My friend Laura Eisenhower spent half her life on this apologia for her grandfather, President Eisenhower, how he got tricked by MJ-12. And it was clear at the time, they were the committee that knew if they were forced to admit that the Germans they just pretended they conquered, in fact, just kicked their ass, Admiral Byrd out of South Pole, the public is going to panic. We can't tell them. Oh dear, and then they murder the secretary of the Forrestal.
Yeah.
And then they sign with the Nebu the Greys in spite of Eisenhower, who practically threatened to shoot him when he found out. So it wasn't, it wasn't so much of a religious conviction about the Greys. No, it was a very practical political consideration. Eisenhower just won the war, and now they lied. Oh, we lost. Oops.
Right. Yeah. And then again,
all because we don't know why an object falls to the ground. The Mercury vortex that kicked Admiral Byrd out of the South Pole, they figured out how an object falls to the ground. They made a vortex that made gravity. We didn't know yet why an object falls to the ground, so we deserve to lose.
Right. I was wondering, Ani, would you be able to continue with what you were reading there? I was just wondering if you'd be so kind as to finish that. I'd love to hear you. I'm
sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no. Me or Ani, sorry.
No, Ani, I did, yes. Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I can. I didn't know if I was going too long. I was just about to get into the more metaphysical half of it, but I wanted to.
Is that okay, Riel? Sorry, I didn't want. Yeah, cool.
Okay, let me just see where I was in it, and then I will continue. And I appreciate that.
You talked about where they went into the dream.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So the Hebrew language signals that there is reality beyond us grammatically, because it is what future has expressed itself as, and all else would be behind us. Thus, the inner spiritual universe will not be into the future, but into the past, all simultaneously in the present, analog to the coming redemption that would be in reality already redeemed. It would be already redeemed, excuse me. This paradoxon is only possible in a world that is even a mirror image distortion language, which is the expression of what is above the abyss. Linguistics, to this mystery, or the Hebrew language, they call it magically succeeding in the world of the so-called Cheyans, which is a word, it's another reference of a word to probably the demiurge, by which today supraluminous particles are understood, by which it is expressed in terms of spatio-temporal terminology and differs from the future into the past. There are existences that can be derived from the mathematical derived equations. There are others undetectable with the known physical, and they don't, because they belong to a world that is in another, a unknown, a foreign energy and material constitution. Now, this is what I meant, Dave, with the research I've been doing. The Presidio was studying something called the anti-verse, or the anti-gods, in a sense. Now, before I continue, I ask this question to Dan Winters. Do you believe there is an anti-verse, or anti-matter is something real?
Well, antimatter is obviously real. That's simple physics. When it's 180 degrees out of phase, that wave is going to explode when it hits you. It's simple. Antimatter is very simple physics. As far as anti-gods, I think we need to get real with the electrical engineering, which is what been referred to as other dimensional beings. When you propagate a longitudinal wave into an array and you inhabit a bigger array because your DNA imploded, you had bliss, and you can lucid dream and die well, that's because the next axis of superposed charge rotation enabled that density to implode and propagate. That's what's called going to the next dimension or ascension. Now, beings that can sustain that level of density can propagate in bigger and bigger arrays. Specific example, the 9. And so that physics means that the word other dimensional being specifically refers to propagating plasma into larger and larger arrays. Why the 9 can show up anywhere they want. Why Dave in 2010 can show up in anybody's TV set just after he said, there's thousands of them Dolman in here, Dave. So that's called inhabiting the array. And that's what's meant by higher dimensional beings. And yeah, there's some good guys and bad guys out there, but they grow gene pools like ours, like a beautiful garden. And we have hope.
Excellent. Excellent. I just proposed that question because when you talk about earlier, and I'll continue in a second, those plasma weapons that destroyed these other planets or Tiamat or whatever they refer to, these asteroid belts or the Oort cloud or debris left over from these plasmic weapons that they used.
It was nukes.
Right. It was in theory from the Presidio that they said prior to our universe comprising of the planets we had, that's when these anti-gods made contact, or antimatter beings came and made contact and caused this big destruction. Now, they refer it in a mystical sense as in God destroyed these chaotic beings, or some type of, you can compare it to the extraterrestrial phenomenon, but something came and destroyed these beings, and there were leftover debris or leftover things.
Well, that's real, but that we have much more specific. 10 to 50,000 years ago, at the time of the Great Flood, the Nebu and the Gray were hiding in the solar system, and the Galactic Federation came back to kick them out, and they wiped the atmosphere off Mars in the explosion that blew up Tiamat, caused the Great Flood. Great detail. They was called the Orion Wars, or the Wars of Expansion, sometimes called the Oxygen Wars. And the version of that history is described identically in the Andromedans and the Pleiadians, Elena Denon. They're all telling the same exact story of the Orion Wars. The Federation arrived here to try to finally remove the Greys and the Bracos, and half blew up the place. And then they left behind the hollow metal moon with the nuclear resonators that amplified the Van Allen belts, which was temporarily a bit of a quarantine, which eventually broke, and the Dracos got away anyway, and they had to come back and fix the mess.
Would this fit, Ani, with the description of, except maybe the words have been, used back in the day as, different than what is being used now, but would this fit in terms of the affairs of your research of the timeline of that period, by chance?
Probably much more older.
Okay. That's interesting.
Probably much more older, because if we're talking, because we're speaking in the sense of physical astro etherical planes, but they're talking in the sense of something that existed before the plane. If he is mentioning fractalization, then that's infinitely other realms,
right?
That we don't really have all of the research for. We're just catching up in this age. I don't know. The ancients could have explained it better than us in a particular way, but with English, you really can't explain a whole lot as a bastard language. But I'm saying, like, in a sense, with the Hebrew languages or these older languages, they were able to employ it esoterically and get the message through that there was something here before the physical or the context that we put it into physics and science today, prior to us having physical bodies or prior to us having astral bodies, because the astral is like a glue to this realm as well. Do you think that, Dan?
Well, I think the word astral could be very well matched on the concept of the longitudinal array, or Kesjan. That kind of fits. And I agree in terms of the physics of Hebrew. I wrote the equation to prove the self-organizing spiral on the torus. And then you look at the shadows indexed by tetra, and you have Hebrew and Sanskrit. I wrote that equation, did the computer animations, which is the map to quadrature, phase conjugation by tetracubic symmetry, which is called four-wave mixing phase conjugate optics, which is how you make the plasma donuts nest into the array, which is your optical cortex, the physics of consciousness. That plasma donut is your physics of consciousness. That's the tornado you look through. So tilting the plasma donuts into the index of tetracube called Hebrew, and if you do that in sequence, the word Bereshith, for example, is a sequence of turns of mind to turn inside out on the surface of a torus, in the beginning, at first, in principle. Well, yeah, that is the principle of the origin of thingness, the sequence of symmetry operations to turn inside out, literally. So Hebrew has good physics, absolutely. And that was a high Draco genetic engineering language. You know, the codons are tetracubic. And that's why the Sanskrit used the same physics. So all languages are basically simply toroidal symmetry physics. There's nothing else out there, actually. Goldenmean.info says DNA ring. So that is good physics. And it's true that in very ancient times, there were, we believe, the cedar races. That's what the 9 are called today. The Kadistu, something they call life designers, the cedar races. The galactic core cultures are sometimes called. There's lots of names for it. And it's true. They planted seeds for DNA. There was a bit of a matrix, a plan, according to many sources.
Could fractality describe what Ani is referring to with respects to the metaphysical sense, the there before here, so to speak, existence? Am I on the right track, Ani, with how I'm asking that?
Well, that's the thing about it. That's the question. Who gave existence to the cedars? That's what I'm studying.
Well, and I think if we study how plasma becomes intelligent and mindful when plasma turns inside out, when it nests toroidally, and when there's 9 donuts, one above the other, Los Alamos proved that plasma becomes self-aware. That's the beginning. And that's when they discovered all the shaman were actually describing plasma shadows. That's what all the cave paintings are about. So the plasma physics of how plasma becomes intelligence is a real answer to your question, in my view.
So
self-aware.
I don't mean to cut you off, Ani. So when, for example, your colleague Dan, Alex Collier, talks about how the moon was brought from all human life originated in Lyra. We entered this dimension long ago when we're a species knocked on the head with amnesia, and I'm sure there's probably many humans on many other planets, you name it. But when we entered this realm, dimension, maybe lack of a defining term is the reason we can't get to the core of this, possibly. I'm not saying in this roundtable, I'm saying in general, but is this, when it came into this reality or dimension, would fractality or plasma physics, in your opinion, be able to describe what Ani is trying to look for in terms of the creation before this?
Well, remember, all the history sources, Palladian, Andromedan, Palladian, they all agree the prism of Lyra, the Lyran Vega civilization, was destroyed by the Draco, and tens of thousands of humanoid civilizations propagated in a diaspora, and there are tens of thousands of intelligent humanoid civilizations in our galactic sector alone. We're only a little piece of that. It just happens that our DNA is quite interesting, so they're all gathering around because we're the best soap opera this side of downtown. The DNA here is valuable, but it ain't like our humanoids are unique. No, they've been around before. They're intelligent. They were just trying to keep the little dream here isolated for long enough so that we could grow up.
Got you. Okay.
Yes,
Please, Ani, continue. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to merge.
No, that's great. That put in context, and I agree. But if there was thousands of other star civilizations, humanoid civilizations,
hundreds of thousands, millions,
then
millions,
we have to only be tapping into something. But it's interesting. I would like to study more of those plasmic shadows to see what you mean. I would like
goldenmean.info/whale dreamers.
Whale dreamers. Okay.
Yeah. And Tony Peratt, Los Alamos Plasma Physics, meets with the shaman, John McGovern, my friend in Adelaide, and they all agree. Yeah, the shamans were doing plasma physics. They all just agree. There's hundreds of pictures.
That's why we have the elder on, so we can have a reference point. So this continuing on, so we're talking about foreign energy and material constitution. In the sphere of their activity and reversal of time may be a natural process. If y'all want to stop me whenever, just let me know. I'm almost done soon. We should keep this in mind. Beyond special relativity stands the energy E, i.e. in a variable ratio to mass m and speed of light c. What does it have to do with the mass m, which when we're speaking of the speed of light is infinitely bigger? If c is in a sense 1/2 of the universal key of it, then it is possible to compare the mass m with the adept, which has the same key in the door. However, the adept is not concerned with the baron. People are identical, but with what is in the magical traditions of mankind, they are different. They're immortals, and they are indestructible. The body in the temple of Set, or the older Typhonian traditions, is called the magic child, or the light organ. This light organ must be created internally in life because it serves in the language of religious symbolism as a heavenly vehicle to the other half, or the other side. Since it is an internal genesis, the components of human consciousness and of the soul, the adept does not appeal to any external cult. Since he or she acts without the cult, they are considered one of the unknown superiors. We should examine the word illuminate in the literal illumination. He or she does not illuminate, but dissolves the soul. It is it is in the darkness we perceive what is black light, that is luminescent, or the key to the mystery consisting of two halves. Can this be the transmutation of how the mass M takes place? To foresee too much from this point, it should be mentioned briefly that the surface tension of this mass M, i.e. its crimp, which means wavy bending, determines the end involved in the breakthrough to the other side, the Etz Ha-Chaim Doth, or this Doth. You heard of Doth before, Dan?
Doth.
I think of Darth Vader.
Yeah, that's what he got it for. It's Kabbalah. The Star Wars Kabbalah, Kabbalistic terms, is Doth.
But I think, again, the idea that during the charge implosion named bliss, it isn't the soul is dissolved. What's happened is the soul is created, because when you implode capacitance named human bliss and then become charged radiance, and that coherence of that longitudinal radiance is named soul, what you take into the lucid dream and when you die. So that process of creating coherence through that compression process, enabling distribution, is an access to the other side. And when you go through that center, it is a perfect black hole, in the sense that the non-destructiveness of that perfected compression means that your attention propagates through the black hole into that array. And clearly you do not get into that array unless ancestor memory likes you, which means if you have intent that is shareable, you have something that serves collective survival, then you get through the door.
Okay.
Because that array is an electric field that's been gathering survival library information for millions of years. It's DNA radio, literally. And it is a dark array. Absolutely. It's a dark field. And inhabiting that array is where we discover, we're connected to all of our ancestors' memory. And that array is the collective unconscious. It is the communion of saints. It is the physics of DNA radio. It is a black hole. It is the darkness. It is the dark crystal. But the physics is teachable.
And I believe when he said dissolve the soul, I believe it was what you're saying is more breaking it down into that actual
into literally what is pure principle. In other words, at the moment of death, that's why if every day when you go to bed, you sort all the memories of the day into pure principle, and that means you can play your day backwards without interrupting, it means you're ready to die or ready for bliss, because you can be compressed. Because now the only thing that remains is perfectly shareable.
Right, because in the alchemical process, the Negrito phase is the dissolving, the albedo, the rubedo, the whitening, and it's going to solve et coagula. I mean, it's a transmutation.
Well, and coagulate means to compress. And in psychoanalysis, it's called the collapse process. What it means is, I only thought I was angry at someone. Now I realize their mother hurt, their father hurt, their mother hurt, their father. And I understand everyone's anger in that situation. And suddenly it all collapsed into oneness. And then you're ready to sleep or die or have bliss. And you will survive compression.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I think that's good. That's good on my end with the information. If you guys want to switch? Yes.
Sure. Yes. I was just going to ask if we can maybe take the next 20 minutes before we wrap up for some questions, if that's okay, from the folks in the live stream. If that's
a few minutes, please. Let's do good. Very appropriate. Please.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. So let's see here. Let me pull up the chat here.
Well, I have Slick Descent. How about that one? Slick Descent. Question for Dan Winter. Could the placenta of the newborn toroidal vortex shape contribute to better recall of ancestral memory if the mother eats it and instill it in the baby? I taught physics of rebirthing for many years. And if you map the change in pressure over time of the perfect birth canal, it's the same golden ratio max point of the squeeze that says, I love you, in the physics of emotion. And that's why underwater birth means higher IQ, because there's no discontinuity of decompression on the way out. So it is about the placenta. It is about what emerges from the birth canal, and the molecules in the placenta were part of that. So, they ate part of the placenta, or they would plant it under the tree that became the soul tree of the child.
If you'd like, Dan, read from the chat, if you'd like, on Zoom, and pick whatever questions you would like to answer, and just let us know whenever you'd like to wrap it up, and we can go like that if you like.
Well, it's okay. Samchad says, what happens when we observe, meditate, internalize sacred geometry? I mean, I think we've kind of addressed that one. That, for example, my friend Gus Giacacci built his house, and the top-down view was one rung on the ladder of DNA. Hex, pent, golden ratio, rectangle. That's one rung on the ladder of DNA. And in the hex part of the house, it was a part where you could have secrets. In the pent part of the house, it was a part where you did infinite sharing. You had to be perfectly shareable, and which fits the physics. Hex is charge isolating and pent is charge imploding. Any witch can tell you. So, when you meditate on charge geometry, you're accomplishing wave mechanics. It's very simple. The hex crystallizes and the pent sends. Well, which is new, and now it's quantum physics. So,
and this uses extremely low frequencies, right, within the wave mechanics?
Well, actually, that pent and hex can be at Planck threshold, or it can be interstellar. Okay. It has a similar function.
Okay.
The pent will always invite implosion, which is, the witch knew that's how you sort. And the hex will always stabilize charge because it's the octave ratio and it's opposite of golden ratio, which means max destructive interference, the octave, the hex view of the cube, which means crystallizing, which means charge stabilizing. So nature always uses the hex to fix and the pent to send. The witch has got it right.
Wow. Huh.
There's a couple of comments and thoughts that I had from Ani's presentation and how it corroborates with what Dan was saying about the 180 degrees out of phase anti-God topic. Ani, I don't know if you touched on the three trees that you've given lectures about in your work, but that to me, corroborates with the third tree, the anti-tree, how that could potentially be this kind of like technology that's able to phase out of our reality. So you have the tree of life, the tree of death, and then the anti-tree, which is the hidden tree that basically you're trying to spread knowledge about.
Odorasha is the name of it. Odorasha is the name of the anti-tree. And I believe that does make sense, how he explained it in the way with the plasmic shadows and going back to these plasmic weapons. From what I understand in the information, that some maybe Draco bloodlines, because I don't really subscribe to those terms. Me personally, I understand the dragon and the draconic reference in esoteric terms, but for this sake, I would say the Draco bloodlines that he was saying that had a lot more information into this, or in their DNA into it. They, from what I understand, their souls were the plasmic weapons. And at a certain time, over a period of time, it's kind of like how you sit wine and it ferments, it fermentates. That's when they had the reference to the Christ and the wine and the god Dionysus, the wine. The soul has been in a humanoid form for such a long time that at some point it becomes a plasma bomb. And I'm talking like a conversion of all of these beings once it's ready. Once it's gone through the cycle of incarnation of enough times, it becomes the weapon itself. And there's some type of theory that some of us are what they call tikkun, which means we're ready for this plasmic weapon again. And that's what all of the destruction of planet movies is about.
I also, sorry, right after Dan, I had a question myself from Scott in the audience.
Okay.
But when your aura is big enough, for example, you see these lenticular clouds, and they say the Siakar, the high-winged Draco Archon, they inhabit the lenticular clouds because their aura is coherent enough to cause the vapor to precipitate. That precipitated the cloud. So that's an example. And that plasma being could steer some tornadoes. It's real, like any good shaman can steer a tornado, who knows? And so, yes, your plasma cloud can grow up, and you could call that a weapon. It's simply the steering of inertia by mind, which inhabits a larger and larger array, which becomes centripetal over a larger and larger electric field. The more it becomes harmonic inclusive.
Sure. I just wanted to bring up very quickly in the chat, since there are so many people here, I want to mention to you folks, I know a lot of you have loads and loads of questions for Mr. Winter. I just want to mention, since we're here, we have almost every other week, we have Mr. Winter on our Patreon, patreon.com/GenerationZ. So for those that really want to ask these questions and are not familiar with the Patreon, please, this is what I meant when I said we have hundreds of extra hours of content. This is, Mr. Winter is a very large part of that so generously, and I thank him for that. I did want to ask Mr. Winter a question here from, I'm going to share my screen with you guys here, from Scott, a very valued member of our community. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, the sort of circle with that of the squiggly lines, and he says these are two perspectives of the same thing. The one on the left looks like a spiral as seen in cultures across the globe, but 2D symbols are representations of 3D things. The spiral is also a tube or cone. Scott, brother, please forgive me. I'm not sure precisely what you wanted to ask here. If you wanted to type it very quickly in the chat, I know that you're here with us. But does that, so far, what I've read to you, Mr. Witt, does that make sense?
It's exquisite. It's perfect. It's gorgeous. And if you click on goldenmean.info/grail, I think we did a pretty good job of animating that. You take the golden spiral down the perfect cone, and from above, it looks exactly like that spiral. From the side, it looks like a vortex of the caduceus, a perfect embedding. And you revolve that, and you've got the Holy Grail. So that's literally how charge and flow. And that, you're right, that's in every single culture. And that is plasma physics. It's quantum.
While Scott types that, I guess we can just keep going, and then I'll see if that answered Scott's question. But thank you, sir.
Yeah, we've got a question here. What is the geometry and color of plasma?
Well, to say what is plasma is sort of like saying, if everything in the universe is made of the same thing, compression, rarefaction, charge, then you couldn't say what it is, because it's everything. So you compress and rarefy the ether, and that's called plus and minus charge, and a cloud of that is called plasma. The thing that's rare is then when a cloud of charge named plasma propagates without heat, and that's called cold plasma, which is well known to be magic in medicine, because cold plasma can propagate when it's non-destructive interference, Therify.net being the ideal. So plasma is just a name for a cloud of charge. And if it can propagate without heat, that means no destructive interference, which means megentropy, which means life. So plasma can have color, but actually plasma phase conjugation is the cause of color. That's another, fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis.
Scott is asking with respects to the symbols, the squiggly, like, the circle and what we just looked at, the wave, so to speak, why they're always all over the place, particularly within kids' movies, Disney movies, things like that.
Yes, it's gorgeous, isn't it? Because every shaman knows you got to find your way down the perfect vortex, sometimes called the Holy Grail, or you will not get immortal. It's really true. Down that perfect vortex, we call it pine cones kissing noses, lies ancestor memory and the collective unconscious and that DNA radio. So yes, you got to climb down that ladder. Absolutely.
Is that part of this alleged Draco dream soul trap, so to speak, or is that a little bit separate?
Well, the Draco Dream Soul Trap is part of that story. If we believe that Enlil Yahweh is the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, sometimes called Grim Reaper, even Anne Rice had some clues, that when you die, if you do not get up the critical inertial escape velocity, you got a problem. I think, the movie Flatliners had it right. You know, that, yes, they come and eat you. True.
Got you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Winter. Scott, I hope that answers your question. That's it for me on my end.
But there were some more questions in this list, right? Real?
Yeah, well, to elaborate just on the answer of the geometry and color of plasma, haven't you done work with the remote viewing of children where you've explained like there is an actual shape of the like of physics?
Well, when you ask the children how they're seeing without their eyes are closed, they're blindfolded, and they're having a trance bliss experience. And it requires relaxation. Bliss trance is a prerequisite. And you can measure the brainwave power spectra. It's the caduceus cascade, exactly as the picture showed. It's that caduceus in your brainwaves. And the picture he drew is gorgeous. And then they say, oh, a vortex wormhole tunnel, a tube, showed up inside my head, and I lined myself up and I looked down that tube, and there is an eyeball. All the kids say the exact same thing. And now we know what they mean. They mean a plasma vortex formed, and attention grabs a hold of that plasma vortex and squeezes. And then the vortex comes to a point, and that's the eyeball, because that's where phase conjugation sorts waves into phase, named perception. The phase conjugate origin of perception, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So yeah, that's a plasma vortex, and it has a definite symmetry and a definite frequency signature in brainwaves. Korotkov measured it, and we teach it, flameinmind.com.
I wanted to bring up here as well too. There's some questions coming in for Ani as well, and same thing as well, guys. We have an exclusive series so kindly done by Ani once a week. That at this point I think we've done, I think in the doubles of hours of worth of content with Ani. So again, if we can't, we'll go through some questions for Ani if that's okay, Riel. And if we can't answer all of them again, folks, Patreon.com/Generation Z. We have a great series both with Mr. Winter and Ani. This is sort of the public preview, but Riel, I guess if you want to read some questions for Ani, if that's okay.
Oh, sure, yeah. From SCP, what is the true state of our natural power?
Well, that's a very vague question because I believe the natural power comes from your intention instead of what you're having attention on. Your intention is very much a part of it. And I believe what Dan Winter says about the astral hygiene. How are you utilizing your spiritual vehicles? That's where your power is going to come from. We teach classes on Patreon, the_spiritual shade room, on a new system called the Inyaga Pathu system, which we're incorporating deep esoteric occult mystery systems into the soul. And how can you utilize different techniques by pulling all of the information together so you can tap into whatever they say your power is, which I believe is completely directing your focus away from the third dimensional reality into hyperdimensional realities. I believe that you can create your own universe. I believe we have that ability. I do not subscribe to us being lesser or greater. I believe we're all equally split apart in consciousness from this thing called the pleroma in Gnosticism, which means we have a home in the hierarchy of the great consciousness of what you call God, of where this whole thing is vibrating from. I believe that we should be tapping into these hyperdimensional realities and stop giving so much attention away. That's what's draining our so-called power in this dimension right now. And that's what the distractions is for. Super Bowl, music, all of this type stuff, all sports, all of that is something to distract you from tapping into those actual fractal fields of consciousness.
And also potential energy feeding events as well.
Absolutely. Every sports, what they call it, stadium is shaped kind of like the Colosseum in Rome, which looks like the Kepra beetle in Kemet. The beetle is basically they're coming in, the people coming in and they're cheering all day, and the demiurge is eating all of that energy up because we're giving our energy out. We're not focusing on the energy in. And that's what we do every day on social media, all of this stuff, study mimetic magic, memes, and all of that stuff. There's a big occult complex where they show in examples how this takes energy as a harvesting from us. So we need to utilize the gifts that we have from our ancestors and begin to reintegrate our consciousness the correct way.
Just wanted to ask this because it's a very, for you, Ani, yes or no answer. From CTRE193 asks, question for Ani. In Gnosticism, the term unrighteous, is he speaking of the demiurge? Or no? That's the question.
Whose term unrighteous? We can't, it depends where it's coming from, but
yeah, good point, because Gnosticism is a bit of a vague term to describe a loose...
yeah, because you have the Valentinian Gnostics, you have the Orphite Gnostics. But if you're just saying in the term unrighteous, yes, they're talking about the counterfeit spirits. They talk about that in the Nag Hammadi library. That's your engineers in the whole Sumerian or the Atrahasis. And what they're speaking of, they come from the counterfeits, which Dan Winter talks about the cloning aspect. You know, cloning, they begin to clone themselves, and that created another gene pool. And then we mix it all together. We're all mixed. So we have facets of that. And if he's just talking strictly on demiurge consciousness, then yes, that is unrighteous, because the demiurge wants to keep you reincarnating in a 3D dimensional reality forever.
This question from Sam, I actually would like to ask both of you guys, if you would like, for both Mr. Winter and Ani, in your views, what are some of the practices to look into to avoid having our energy being quote unquote harvested for negative purposes?
I'll let Dan go first. I think he's muted.
Sorry, I was muted. When we talk about astral hygiene, one of the first things you think about is check for holes in the aura, so that, you know, GDV, there's various ways to check for holes in the aura. Your aura becomes symmetric when your attention is symmetric. So if you're implosive or blissful, your aura becomes coherent. Whereas if you are alcoholic or depressed, your aura becomes very porous and you're very susceptible to astral plasma parasites. So that's a basic construct, that everything really is about feeding your aura, and begin to habituize the idea of each decision you make, which broccoli you eat and who you kiss, is all about, is my aura going to grow? You know, which building am I going to sit in? Is my aura going to grow? And obviously the goal is to get free enough to grow your aura. So that's fundamental to astral hygiene. And then there's the idea that if you're, for example, channeling your ancestors, well, you know, when they did it with a circle of shaman in the desert, there was a circle of the tribe, such that the intense, focused intent of everyone in that bliss circle trance meant that only their ancestors used that radio. However, when John Dee, for example, used a scrying mirror and projected it outside his body for ancestor phone calls, in the longitudinal interferometry and the phase conjugate mirror for astral phone calls like Nostradamus, well, then there's more astral hygiene risk, because you're not sure who's using that phone call. So again, it is about the centripetal nature of intent enabling the sorting.
Thank you so much. Ani, again, just what practices you, in your view, one could do to avoid being, I guess you could say, infected, if you will, by these parasites and all that?
Well, I would say spirituality is about changing your perception. Right now, we all have a perception as we go through our lives. My teachings is on the 7 levels of the soul. So you begin to develop these levels of the hierarchy of the soul. For instance, when you're only 3 to 7 years old, you haven't gained the ability to actually create a being. A woman isn't ovulating or whatever you would say, and a boy hasn't obtained sperm yet at that age. But when you actually move into the ages of 12, 13, 14, then you gain another soul, because now you're able to create life then. So as you gain these stages up into the soul, to protect yourself from energy harvesting, one is going back to your intention. What is your perception of? You have to grow your perception. That's why I go to a lot of platforms, because I don't want to be in a box. I want to grow my perception of reality. And by growing your perception, when you actually leave this realm, your consciousness has actually expanded. Like he says, that donut has expanded, and now you're able to get fractal. and you're able to go into places that others cannot go. And I guess just like what he says, a lot of practices of different systems like voodoo or different systems and Germany or whatever, they focus on specific radios, like he says, like how to call entities. My thing is to use it all. That's just me. You have to at least learn each system or have an ideal of it and see what works for you. Then maybe you won't get caught up in that same system because you're probably in the wrong one right now. And just because everybody around you is utilizing that doesn't mean it's specific for you. And that's a part of how people get harvested by these parasitic entities. They're not expanding their perception of it all.
If I could throw my 2 cents in for the stream here, for those wondering, I mean, I know it sounds cheesy or corny or what have you, but it's true. But with both what Mr. Winter and Ani said, perception, when you, again, there's a difference between between being cocky and egocentric and having full confidence in yourself. But once you start to inhabit that more and more, some interesting things start to happen when you use the ability of visualization. It really does. It changes the whole aspect of things. You start to realize people that, were not really meant to be around you will start to move away from you, and the ones meant to be around you will start to come towards you. That it truly is. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Dan, you're muted.
Oh, just to say that was beautiful.
Oh,
Very
thank you.
nice.
I mean, I just, again, I take from both Donnie's work and your work and the concept of visualization and the toroid field, and it's true. What the ones at the top want us to think is just imagination. It, at least to me, someone who was not a spiritual person even 6 months ago, it's not just imagination in my view. So.
Yeah, well, in fact, IMOG from Imagine, Matrix of Agni, the Matrix of Fire, IMOG, Imagine. When we told the story, when the Steiner kids visualize the rose, they know they've succeeded because the room fills with the smell of roses. We teach the physics. Point is that they have not lost the inner muscle to IMOG to make a picture inside, which is the only real physics of creation. That's when you grab the wave by the throat and you created that rose inside your head. That's the beginning.
It's incredible you mentioned the rose, because as I grew up Catholic Christian raised, and I remember there was always talked about a certain priest, Saint Padre Pio, and it said that if his spirit were to manifest itself in front of you, you would smell a rose before you could see his spirit, which is interesting. I mean, just a personal story, but I was raised being taught that little thing there.
Yeah, and the flowering brain, you see, has infrared. And that infrared actually is the physics of olfaction. That's how it smells. That's why hummingbirds smash into the window of a sealed house when someone's having bliss inside, because the infrared propagates the smell of bliss through the window. The flowering brain made the smell of the rose.
Wow, I didn't even think of that. Well, I'm good on my end, Riel. I'm not sure if you wanted to, and Ani and Mr. Winter, not sure if you guys wanted to wrap this up or.
Well, it's getting late here. I think we had great fun. I enjoyed.
Thank you. We thank you so much for your time, sir. We had a right on the dot 2 hours. That was fantastic. And Ani, man, that was great. Thank you so very much, guys.
Nice to meet
I just wanted to say that I totally agree, and I love that that's how we are ending this little discussion, which is like an intro to advanced perspectives of everybody's respective fields today. But the concept of what we can do to protect ourselves from, having our energy harvested, and I know that Dan does deep work into the creating bliss consciousness, and recently gave a lecture on Generation Z, explaining the importance of growing your aura. And that by definition, you are a parasite until you're able to create your own source of charge. So for me, I've been focusing for, as long as I've been a conscious adult, of creating my own source of energy. Instead of needing coffee or whatever sort of external factors, it's creating the energy from within. So that would just be my 2 cents of whatever you go about doing that, whether it means you need to sleep 10 hours a day to feel rested or whatever. But I also really, really liked how Ani is saying that it's a growing, and that going outside of the box, expanding your perspective. That's exactly what my intention was with gathering us here today, was to share and grow, and everybody learn from each other, and then we can share this content with everybody else.
I want to mention to the chat, we need to thank Riel for doing this. This was not my idea. It was Riel's idea for assembling this. So
His birthday, and Riel has fire in his eyes too.
Yeah,
He demonstrates the principle. Happy birthday!
Yes, happy birthday. And sorry, one last thing. Could Dan and Ani, could you let the audience know where and how they can find you guys, if that's all right?
Well, info@fractalfield.com. And fractalfield.com. So it's easy to remember. I'm available. I'm happy to share.
Awesome.
We're a shareable word.
Yes, thank you. And Ani.
Yes, you can find me at patreon.com/the_spiritual shade room, or you can follow me on Instagram, the_spiritual shade room.
Awesome, thank you. And just a quick friendly reminder to everybody, we have both a separate unique series with both Mr. Winter and with Ani on patreon.com/Generation Z. But again, this has been a great 2 hours. And Riel, did you want to say anything on your end, or we're good to wrap it?
We're good to wrap it up.
Awesome.
Just blessings, and thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for sharing your time. And yeah, just so much gratitude.
Thank you so much, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.
I'd love